October 4th, 2025. 4:31 a.m. A Russian missile corvette rested on Lake Onega, convinced it had slipped beyond the war's reach. The crew expected silence, not impact. But the moment the sirens pierced the darkness, they learned the truth. Ukraine's strike had found them in the one place they believed no enemy could ever touch. The GRAD's captain had been asleep for less than an hour when the first sirens snapped him awake. He reached for the intercom, expecting a routine fault, but the voices pouring through the speaker carried panic he had never heard inside a Russian warship. The crew on the bridge could barely process what they were seeing. A threat alert was coming from the middle of Lake Onega, a place every officer believed was untouchable. The GRAD sat anchored on calm water that looked like a sheet of black glass, protected by distance, geography, and a doctrine Russia trusted for generations. The White Sea-Baltic Canal wrapped around it like a moat. St. Petersburg sat a few hours to the west. S-400 launchers guarded everything from the city's skyline to its industrial districts. According to every Russian chart, this lake was the one place Ukraine could never reach. The captain trusted that belief so much that he lowered the ship's readiness level. Most of his crew were off the ship, enjoying their leave in Karelia's quiet towns. The AK-630 guns were resting in standby. The ship's sensors were running at reduced power because no one believed danger could slip through a corridor protected by Russia's oldest military instinct. Yet danger was already above them. The warship's sirens kept rising, and the crew rushed to their stations while trying to understand how this could be real. For decades, Russian doctrine preached that strategic depth would keep threats at bay in their heartland. Now that doctrine was cracking open under their feet. The lake that functioned as the Northern Navy's shield had turned into its weakest point, and its crew realized too late that they were sitting inside a trap built from their own overconfidence. They were about to learn that the safest harbor was nothing more than an illusion. Hours before the blast tore through Lake Onega, the first clue surfaced far from the water. A Ukrainian Horlitsia EM signals unit had been scanning encrypted Russian channels deep inside northern territory. These operators were trained to hear patterns that others fail to sense. That night they caught a whisper that did not belong. A Black Sea Fleet command frequency was transmitting near the Finnish border. That should have been impossible. That channel was meant for ships in Sevastopol, not vessels hiding thousands of kilometers inside Russia's interior. Yet the signal strength was rising from a direction the operators knew too well: the White Sea-Baltic Canal. They escalated the finding because anomalies like this never pointed to routine traffic. They pointed to mistakes, and mistakes often uncovered something valuable. Ukraine's satellite analysts began scanning commercial imagery across the canal network. The White Sea-Baltic route was normally a ghost corridor. Most of the military vessels that used it were narrow, discreet, and rarely caught on wide-angle scans. Yet one silhouette stood out on Lake Onega: long hull, wide deck, distinct superstructure. It matched a Bayan M-class corvette, and not just any corvette. It matched GRAD, a Kaliber missile carrier that Russia had quietly pulled out of the Black Sea and tucked into a safe harbor. Ukrainian intelligence then received final confirmation from a GUR insider cell operating inside Russia. The cell reported the ship's name, its condition, and its precise anchoring point. The report also divulged the captain's arrogance, which created a window Ukraine had no intention of ignoring. A direct strike on the target should have been impossible. The area sat under the S-400 umbrella, protecting St. Petersburg. Pantsir units guarded nearby infrastructure. Every route into the region was wired with radars capable of spotting anything larger than a bird. Ukraine chose a weapon built for this exact contradiction: the Liuti long-range drone. It could travel over 1,200 kilometers. It carried a warhead meant for structural penetration. It navigated through GPS jamming because it relied on inertial guidance driven by gyroscopes, accelerometers, and preloaded terrain maps. And in the final seconds, its electro-optical seeker searched for what no radar could hide: heat and silhouette. To escort it, Ukraine launched 2 Banshee LR drones. They carried only electronic warfare modules designed to blind Russian radars by creating narrow corridors of interference. The decoys would draw fire, and the Liuti would slip beneath them. The plan was to force Russia to stare at the obvious threat, while the real blade crawled through the gap it left exposed. The flight began from a concealed northern base. 3 drones rose into the cold air and headed toward a region the Kremlin trusted unquestionably. They flew through radar gaps that had been mapped for months. Besides, they crossed low population zones chosen to avoid unwanted eyes. Finally, they approached the lake through a corridor so rarely used that Russian operators barely monitored it. Russia believed the threat was thousands of kilometers away, while Ukraine knew the truth. The safest place in a careless enemy's mind is the deadliest target you can strike. The Banshees cut across Russia's northern airspace with a confidence that made them look suicidal. Their job demanded it. They flew higher, louder, and hotter than the Liuti, shaping a profile that any Russian radar operator would mistake as the primary threat. Their silhouettes were deliberate bait designed to light up the screens of every air defense crew within reach. Hours into the flight, the first Russian radar caught a faint trace. A NABO-M operator thought he had something, but the moment he adjusted his frequency, the return dissolved. A focused jamming burst from a Banshee wiped the signal clean. The trace never returned, and the operator dismissed it as a ghost reading. That error opened the first seam in Russia's shield. As the trio pushed deeper, the terrain below shifted into forests and water corridors that Russian air defense considered safe by geography alone. Little did they know the Ukrainians had mapped these gaps for months, tracking radar dips and blind valleys that left entire stretches exposed. 100 kilometers from Lake Onega, a Panzer battery locked onto the 2 Banshees. The commander believed he had caught intruders attempting to probe the perimeter. He focused entirely on them. He never considered that another platform was flying several kilometers behind and well below the radar's bottom edge. Liuti slipped forward unseen, gliding low enough that the curvature of the Earth erased it from the screen. The Banshees kept jamming, forcing the Panzer to chase false angles. Every second they stayed alive was another second Liuti drifted closer to the lake. Russia reinforced St. Petersburg's air defense posture because it assumed the threat was aimed at a refinery or a naval yard. No one imagined that a missile was heading toward a warship hidden inside an inland lake. Liuti crossed the final ridge with its seeker cooling and ready. The Banshees still held the Russians in a guessing game. Air defense crews stared at fast-moving decoys and never noticed the silent shape approaching the heart of the canal. The Ukrainians had built this corridor with deception, and the Russians were walking straight through it. The path to Lake Onega had opened, and the warship had minutes left. The strike team crossed into Russia's northern airspace while the region was still half asleep. Little did the officers in St. Petersburg know that the real attack had slipped under every radar cone they trusted. The Banshee decoys flew high and obvious, daring the Panzer crews to lock on. They did, exactly as planned. Missiles launched, consoles lit up, and Russian operators focused on the wrong threat, while the actual blade, the Liuti, carved forward through the lower radar lobe where no one was watching. The Banshees jammed every frequency they touched, turning radar screens into white static. For several blinding seconds, the entire defense grid stared at the snow. Those few seconds were enough. Liuti emerged over the black water of Lake Onega with its EO/IR seeker scanning for heat. The corvette's engines still glowed beneath the decks, a beacon the Russians never imagined could be seen from hundreds of kilometers away. The drone locked on. Its descent steepened, and the engine screamed across the lake like a saw ripping through steel. The captain only understood what was happening when the warhead punched through the hull. If you were on that bridge, hearing that dive too late to stop it, what would go through your mind first? Drop your call in the comments. When the GRAD's burning hull sank into Lake Onega, the explosion ripped straight through a belief Russia had carried for centuries. Strategic depth, Moscow's sacred shield, died at that moment. The idea that distance, winter, and geography could smother any enemy disappeared under a single 75-kilogram warhead. The Kremlin's elite felt the impact first. Lake Onega wasn't a battlefield, but a backyard. Vacation homes, private docks, summer estates, every symbol of untouchable privilege were now in a strike zone. Panic spread through encrypted chats because the message was unmistakable. If Ukraine could hit here, it could hit anywhere. In the Ministry of Defense, maps became traps. Commanders faced an equation they couldn't solve. Pull air defenses from the front and risk collapse there. Leave them in place and watch attacks punch deeper into Russia's interior. Every choice opened another wound. The attack ended in minutes, but its consequences will echo for years. A warship lost deep inside Russian forces raises a question no map can answer. So tell us, if distance no longer protects anyone, what does? Drop your take below, hit like, and subscribe for the next Frontline Breakdown.